Welcome to Hope at Night, featuring Carlot Dorvé, Peter Landless, Q&A with our live audience, and host, Anil Kanda. Today's episode, would you risk your career over God's command to rest? And here's your host, Anil Kanda.
Do you remember your first crush? You drop everything for them, dress to impress, and bathe in whatever cologne you could find? For me, it also meant checking the car could run and making sure that my bank account could handle more than a milkshake. All of this just to spend time together, and every moment was worth it. And today we're talking about another kind of date, a weekly date with someone who loves you more than life itself. It's called the Sabbath, and it's God's invitation to set aside the busyness, the burdens, and the back-to-back meetings to just spend time together. You might say, that sounds nice and all, but how do we keep the Sabbath in a world that can't seem to stop? How do we prioritize our date with God when everyone else is working overtime? Our first guest knows what it means to choose the Sabbath, even when it meant turning down high-profile gigs. He's a world-class trumpet player with a PhD in music and a powerful testimony and a whole lot of faith. Please welcome to Hope at Night, Dr. Carlot Dorvé. Now, do I call you Dr. Dorvé, Carlot? What would you prefer?
Carlot is fine.
Okay. Carlot, I hate to call attention to the obvious, but you're missing an arm.
That is true.
Could you tell us what happened?
I lost my arm when I was 4.5 years old. It was spending time with my grandmother in Haiti. That's where I was born. And while I was playing with my cousin, and I fell, and I broke my wrist. But the challenge was my grandmother did not want my mother to know the situation because my mother was a single mom at that time. And she decided to not tell my mother and then try to see if my arm could be healed without letting my mother know. Mm-hmm. And my arm got infected. And by the time I went to the hospital, it was too late. They have to amputate the arm to save my life.
Now, you're a trumpet player. Now,
Yes.
I couldn't play a trumpet even with two arms, right?
Yeah.
How in the world did you become a trumpet player?
I think it's how my mother raised me. Because as far as I can remember, she would pray with me early in the morning. And she will tell me how important it is to trust God in everything, that nothing is impossible with God. So when someone told me that I could not do something, and I figured that if I trust God, for some reason, God will make it happen. When I wanted to play the trumpet, I was probably around 9, but I keep asking. They told me that I could not. So I keep asking for over 3 years. And I did believe that if they let me try, God will make it possible for me to do. So after 3.5 years, the music teacher decided to give me a chance to try. So from that point, I do understand that if I want to succeed in that, I have to do my part and then let what I cannot do to God.
With mankind, it's a disability, but with God, it's a possibility.
Absolutely. Right. And I even think that a disability, it's sometimes, for me personally, I believe that it is an opportunity to try God. And I feel like you have to have some challenges for God to intervene where you feel like you can't.
Were others surprised that you became a PhD holding world-class trumpet player in the U.S.?
There were a few, even some of my friends actually. When I was in Haiti, I told some of my friends, I'm going to be studying music. And actually, one of my friends laughed because they thought, how would that be? Because you don't have the mean, plus you don't have the connection. How will you be able to even have a degree in music in the US? As human, we tend to see things that make sense to us. But again, it is important to know that things that doesn't make sense to us is God's business, not ours. So I trust it this way. So some of my friends could not believe that I made it to a PhD in music. Yeah.
Now, with the challenge of not having your arm and then the stress of getting your PhD, you're also a Christian.
Yes.
Who is committed to keeping the weekly Sabbath. What exactly is the Sabbath?
I discovered that no matter what people can think about the Sabbath, really, it's a date with God that you don't want to miss. It's like if someone is dating someone, really, you always excited that person that you love, that you're going to meet with that person. For me, and I was thinking, you know what? It's really a date with God. Why would I have to trade that with anything else? God is the most important person in my life, who loves me more than I love myself.
What does the Bible teach about the Sabbath?
For me, the Sabbath, it's a time that you rest. You put it aside where you don't really do any work. You don't do any things that for you to do your own things, but where all your focus is on God. So for me, that's one of the reasons doing gigs on Sabbath is an issue for me.
So from my understanding, as you are sharing, is that the Sabbath is this beautiful time with God where you lay aside, we call it secular activity.
Yes.
Then what do you do on the Sabbath?
Well, I go to church and I pray and I praise God, and I also do good to people around me. I visit people who are sick, and I basically sometimes I go to nursing home and I do little music and worship for them. And I spend time with God, really.
So I got to ask, though, what is the difference between playing your trumpet, throughout the rest of the week and then playing your trumpet on Sabbath?
Well, I think for me, it's like the focus. The focus has to be God. During the week, for example, I can take a few examples. One time I even had to let go a performance in Carnegie Hall just because I had to rehearse on Sabbath. Not necessarily because you could not play your instrument, but the principle is that time has to be for God. But if you have to do it for your own good, as a gig, as a performance, as a job, it's like the focus really shift a little bit. For me, I have to have the focus on God.
I think you hinted at it a little bit. One of the most challenging decisions you've had to make was saying no to a very big gig. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. Actually, that started when I was undergrad. So I was supposed to do a tour, and then they end up playing in Carnegie Hall for the last performance in the tour. But the rehearsal for the tour has to be done in Carnegie Hall at 3 p.m. on Saturday. And I went to the person that was organizing the tour, and I said, so I have an issue. I will not be able to do that. And there was different things that came up, and they told me that, why? Because this might be one of the best decisions of your life. And I said, I understand, but my principle is that I keep the Sabbath. And unfortunately, a lot of them, unfortunately and fortunately too, they did not know exactly what the Sabbath was. And I think that was also an opportunity for me to tell them exactly what it was. Actually, I would like to share this one. This one was, actually two of them was very important for me. I remember one of them was a gig that I was supposed to do in Washington, D.C. And they called me. The gig was supposed to be on Saturday. So they asked me if I can do it. And I said, well, I cannot do it. They called me 2 weeks before the gig. They switched it to make it on Sunday, allow me to do it.
Wonderful.
And that was challenging at first because, as a musician, you always want those big performances. And one of them was very challenging for me. That's when I was doing my PhD. During my PhD, I was the teaching assistant for the marching band. Now, most people who know marching band, all the performances are on Saturday. And I did not know too much about it. So when they give me the offer, I say yes, until when they give me the schedule. And they give me the schedule. I saw one of the day I have to be from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Saturday. And I called them, I said, I could not do this. And my advisor said, well, is that a one-time thing? I said, no, I just can't do those work on Saturday. And he said, well, do you understand your job? And I said, well, I understand. So we know, I tell you ahead of time. If you feel like that's not gonna work, let me know now. But I say those things, it's not because it was easy. It was very hard for me. The reason it was very hard, I just literally turned down a possible opportunity to do a PhD at Penn State because I was doing my master's there. And then when I do this one, and they could have said, well, if you cannot do that, we cannot sponsor you. Because it was a teaching assistant, you don't have to pay for school, you get paid stipend. And it was very hard for me. During the week, they still give me the same schedule, expect me to be there on Saturday. On Friday, I had to make one of the hardest decisions I felt for me, because it was very challenging for me to just make that decision, to remind them that I cannot do it. And I told them, just so you know, I will not be there tomorrow. So they did not email me back, so I was like shocked, because I was hoping, I said, well, maybe this is it. But I said, well, you know what? God always have my back. Why should I have to worry? So I just have to trust God, and God will do the rest. If this is not for me, God has a better opportunity. And they called me, they reach out to me on email like on Monday, and then meet on Tuesday, so that I can tell them exactly how I keep the Sabbath and what the Sabbath was. And they accommodate me, and I had to go to Europe with them. They make sure that they plan all concerts before sunset if it is on Friday, after sunset if it is on Saturday.
Oh, they completely accommodated you.
Absolutely.
You know, Carlo, some people may look at you and say, you know, you've got a big disability, you've got a restriction in your life, but it seems that God has worked in such a way where it's given you more diligence, more determination, and now you're a world-class trumpet player. And it seems that sometimes people may look at this seventh-day Sabbath you're talking about as a restriction. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, it's to your advantage.
Absolutely.
What are some of the blessings that you get for keeping the Sabbath?
I think for me, Sabbath worked in my life in different ways. Helped me to trust God more. Sabbath also helped me to experience God in a different level. Things that I had to do where for me, it's like a risk. But I see how God's work. It's almost, in a sense, you know, that verse in the Bible in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 9, that says, it seems like we'll make as a spectacle, not only to angels and to men. I feel like sometimes God put you in that situation so that he not only tests you, but also strengthen you at the same time to prepare you for other challenges. And I feel like it's always even better to have a challenge, because that's when you feel like God will do something amazing. And sometimes that's basically how I think. I say, well, you know what? I have that challenge today. I don't know how to solve it, but that's good, because God, the God to whom nothing is impossible, will step in. Right. And will, at least I'm going to learn something new.
Right. And it's like what that one motivational speaker said, setbacks are setups for comebacks, right?
Absolutely.
Would you mind sharing a song with us?
Absolutely.
And the inspiration behind it?
Absolutely. Well, the song that I'm going to play today, it's called Jesus Paid It All, and it's a medley in Whole Sacred Head Now Wounded. So for me personally, I always feel like I don't have to worry about anything because Jesus paid it all. So why do we have to worry? And, you know, the second one helped me to think about Jesus on the cross. So for me, this summarized my life and why I have to trust God with all challenges.
Wonderful. Welcome back to Hope at Night. If you've ever wondered if the Sabbath is worth standing up for, our next guest has an answer you won't forget. He's a cardiologist, a former physician to President Nelson Mandela, and now retired. But before all that, he was a young doctor in military boot camp, facing pressure to work, march, and to take tests on the Sabbath. Please welcome to Hope at Night, Dr. Peter Landless. Dr. Landless, thanks so much for being here. You've had a remarkable career in medicine and ministry. Could you share with us some of the early influences that were in your life that led you down this path?
Yes, it's a long story, and I don't know that you have enough time because I've lived a long time. But as I listened to the interview with Carlot, so many of the influences were so similar. I had a wonderful mother and father, and was brought up understanding that Sabbath and the observing of Sabbath is a privilege. My parents had not always kept Sabbath. They had been with a different church before that, but they became Seventh-day Adventists just a year or two before I was born, which was a huge advantage for me because by then they had settled down into a way of life which included Sabbath as the best day of the week. And of course, church was wonderful, and we had young people's meetings in the afternoon and kids' meetings at that stage. And Saturday night was a church night at the church hall, and there would be entertainment of games and getting together. And it was a day of joy and gladness.
It sounds like you lived a blessed, you had a blessed upbringing,
Absolutely.
Surrounded by great influences.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you were, as you said, you were keeping the Sabbath, which Carlo talked about earlier. But how'd you end up in the military?
Well, we all make mistakes. Well, it really wasn't my mistake. It was, I was drafted. And it was at a time, you probably understand that I was not born in the US, I was born in South Africa. And it was a time of, I think most wars are unjust. But the war that I was called up to be in was an unjust war. And it was related to the shoring up of the apartheid system. And I had decisions to make. There was no choice as to whether you went or not, but I had the opportunity to make two choices. Number one, I refused to carry weapons because of the convictions of whether or not one should kill, and secondly, strongly motivated by the fact that this was an unjust war. The second thing was Sabbath duties. Now, I fully understand. People don't choose the day they get sick. So the treatment of illness and acute problems and emergency has never been a question in my mind. That's why we do it. We take care of it. But the routine stuff, and that affected my entire career from school days, medical school days, postgraduate days, where opportunities came up, where I was, for example, able to go to Cambridge and do special courses and so on, but they were largely over a Saturday. And I said, I can't do it if it's on a Saturday.
You've mentioned the Sabbath a number of times, and that is very important to you, part of your upbringing. But what does the Bible actually teach about the Sabbath? Could you give us the big picture ideas behind the Sabbath, what the Bible is saying in regards to that?
I think that's a very key question that you're asking, and I think it rests on another foundation. And that is basically, it is not the day, it is the God of the day. And Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. And Carlo made an interesting allusion to the fact that when you prepare for the Sabbath, it's like having a date with God. If you love him, if we love him, he says, if you love me, keep my commandments. And then you look back at what he said when he created, and he said, on the seventh day, God rested. God tired? Not at all. But he rested on the Sabbath day. And in the commandments it says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you labor, do all your work, and the seventh is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. And so it goes through and it lists who may not work. You may not work. Your family may not work. Your animals may not work. And so, it gives the whole description. Why? And that to me was a key question. Because it's good for us. God didn't need the Sabbath. And the other component of the understanding of Sabbath is a memorial in time. Time is universal. If it was, remember the Sabbath day in London, how would we all get to do that? Or in a certain time zone? But we can do it in time. But if we are limited by place, it makes it a little more difficult. So what I understood, and what I believe firmly, and what the science has shown as well, is that the Sabbath has been given to us as a rest from our work and our works, but to glorify the God we serve.
You're describing that the Sabbath is found in the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis. You mentioned the commandments.
Exodus.
And I love how you painted this picture that it's for our own good ultimately in the end. Like it blesses us as we do this. But Dr. Landless, someone might say, look, that sounds like an act of rebellion in a crazy world that is just so focused on every minute, every day, the hustle, the grind. You got to get every opportunity you can get. What you're talking about is to say, look, God calls us to rest. We need to rest, even if the world is still passing us by. Is that right?
Absolutely. And it is a crazy thing. It's a good crazy thing to do. You talk about the kind of life we're living at the moment. We live a life of hurry. Everything's a rush. Everything's time-related. And we have microwaves and cell phones and all kinds of connectivity, and we don't have enough time. But God has said, rest a while. Here's the other deal. During the French Revolution and shortly after that, and even at times of war, there have been times when countries have said, we will go to a 10-day week. What happened on those 10-day weeks? People became less efficient, less productive. Mental health issues went up. All kinds of situations arose, and they had to go back to the 7-day week. The 7-day week is a cycle that seems to have been put in place in our very hard wiring so that we have a day of rest.
So you're saying it's not just a biblical commandment, but in very reality itself, we're biologically programmed to have this day of rest. And then when we bypass that or compromise that, you shared some of the effects.
Absolutely.
What are some other effects that take place when we don't have this day of rest?
Well, stress goes up. Mental health issues, emotional issues, physical issues. It's interesting, and there have been studies done on Jewish people who keep Sabbath. And it's been noted that people who strongly believe and keep a Sabbath day, that they found that even the death rate on those days have decreased, because people look forward to the joy of connecting on Sabbath. So, and the other thing which happens when we don't have a Sabbath, we lose a connectivity. It's not only the connectivity and primarily with God, which I heard a lot, and I really appreciated what Carlo talked about, but it's connection with one another. It's a day of being together, of relationship. It's not a day of sleeping the day away, of trying to recover from just the excesses of the week. It's a day of getting together. It's interestingly, Dan Buettner wrote for the National Geographic and pointed out that there are blue zones, places where people live to be 100 and more. One of those places was Loma Linda, Southern California. And there is where people keep, at the Loma Linda University area, keep Sabbath, and found that not only is quality of life improved, length of life is improved. Well, is it related to other things? Diet, exercise, rest, all of that. But rest is so important. So Sabbath has a very formal, it was published in National Geographic 2005. It's still talked about a great deal.
That's really fascinating. You shared two parts to this. One of those parts is, look, there's a lot of negative effects when you don't have this day of rest. I mean, we see it, the world's just, it's so stressed, overstimulated. I mean, people are broken.
Absolutely.
And then on the other side, you shared, hey, this is what happens when you keep the Sabbath. And you see the blessings and the benefits, even longevity, as you shared. It seems to be restoring us to a natural harmony with God's ways and God's principles.
Absolutely.
It seems the Sabbath helps contribute to balance and being centered and grounded in life.
And Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath.
Right.
He gave it to us as a time to be with him, a time to rest, to refresh, and to reboot.
Dr. Landless, you've, as I shared earlier, had a remarkable career in medicine, ministry. You've been around some very remarkable people. You also were in the military. Could you share with us one or two of experiences that you had trying to be in the world, but not of the world, being challenged by the military, but trying to keep God's holy day? I can imagine just the complications there.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I was much younger and maybe a little more brash at that time, or less overtly brash, and just finished medicine and called into the army and in boot camp, and you do all kinds of things. And one of them, you have to now, during the boot camp time, although we were going to be medical officers, you have to be commissioned and you have to go through what a soldier goes through. And one of the things was to pass a driver's test, which was so simple. But the regimental sergeant major said, you will do your test on a Saturday morning. I said, I can't. I said, what do you mean you can't? I said, it's Sabbath. Ask your pastor, you know, if you can do it on Saturday. I said, I don't need to ask the pastor because it's God's Sabbath, not his Sabbath. And they said, well, if you don't do it on a Saturday, you will be the only physician in the army who's not commissioned. I said, well, so be it. And they left it be, and on a Friday afternoon around about 4 o'clock, the regimental sergeant major came blustering along in a jeep and said, get in the vehicle. I said, where are we going? I thought I'm going to be in big trouble. He said, we're going to do your test. And they did it before sunset. You know, so that was a wonderful blessing. The other things were related to not doing things on a Sabbath, to even the passing out parade, the practices for that. They said, well, if you don't, firstly, you don't have a weapon, and secondly, if you're not going to be with us on a Saturday morning to do thus and so, you're not going to. I said, that's fine. But they watched us marching, and I'd been the leader of the school cadet band, and I learned how to march. My father taught me because he was in the military prior to that. And the chief of the training services was watching all these physicians being pushed around in the field and doing all sorts of things, and he called me out. And I thought, here we go again. Well, he said, why haven't you got a weapon? I told him why. He said, where did you learn to march? I said, well, I learned this through my father and the school. He said, are you taking part in the stepping out parade? I said, no, I can't because of... He said, I'm giving the instruction that you will. So they overruled things which were not in the past done.
Right.
And permitted it. And, it was a blessing. And why did we do this? Not to be difficult, but to follow God's blessed instruction. He's told us if we do what He asks us to do, He will bless.
If you honor Him, He will honor you.
Absolutely.
Now, speaking of honor, could you tell us what these medals are all about?
Well, they are, and the one with the orange ribbons, that is more related, it's called the Pro Patria. It's for service in a active military area and serving well. The one with the blue ribbon, that's called the Southern Cross Medal. That is a medal which is given only to, and it was only prior to that time, given to permanent force, full-time military personnel. And it's a medal given for exceptional service. And what happened is, well, a number of things happened. During my initial service, which was a 2-year stint, I'd been in various places, and I received what's called the Surgeon General Award of Merit. And that was just what I thought for doing my job. But they felt it was something which should be recognized. When I went into the operational area, it was an interesting time. It was a battalion that was deployed, and I was the medical officer for that battalion. But apart from that, we would do regular clinics for the local population. This was up in the border area of Namibia and Angola. Many areas in large countries and large territories don't have adequate health facilities to serve the needs of those who are far away from cities. And so I would do a clinic every day. Apart from taking care of the battalion, I would do clinics every day, some at the gate of the camp, a number further away. One was at a Finnish mission. And each Saturday, Sabbath, I would go and see. It was a very small, distant clinic, and see patients who would otherwise not have had any medical help. And on the one Saturday, I had seen a young baby, and I didn't have the facility to admit her. And gave the treatment and said, I'm coming back next week. So same time. That day, the following Saturday, it was pouring with rain, absolutely pouring with rain. Now, we were not allowed to travel without minesweepers. Engineers would sweep the road, travel to the clinic, do what we needed to do, and then come back. And in fact, the commanding officer said to me, you don't need to go today because of the rain being so severe. Go next week. I said, no, I've made the undertaking to go. I'm going. So they gave me the bodyguard and the 2 vehicles. We went off, and it really was raining so heavily, and there was such a lot of mud and water that I made the decision that instead of minesweeping the road, we would travel next to the road. Bundu bashing, we called it. And which we were allowed to do, provided we did not disturb the lands of the local population. So we didn't go traveling through and destroying things. So going there to the clinic, everything went fine. We got there, saw the patient who was doing better, and I was much happier for having seen that. And then we finished and were coming back. And there was one portion of the trip which one couldn't navigate without crossing the road. And we'd done that on the way up. We did the same on the way back. But the insurgents had actually planted 2 anti-tank mines and a cheese mine.
So if I understand this correctly, you were taking another path to avoid all these other anti-tank mines, but apparently on the path that you were traveling on, there was some anti-tank mines planted there as well.
It had been planted in the time that we were at the clinic. Mm-hmm. So coming back, and it was just a huge explosion. I mean, the size of the hole was larger than the full circumference of the table that you're sitting at, and even deeper. I was thrown out of the vehicle despite wearing a safety belt, about 100 feet. Fortunately landed on my haunches, lost my glasses. I'm so short-sighted, I dream out of focus. Anyway, and I looked and I saw my hand, and it had been damaged. I'd been doing surgery prior to that. And I was actually quite rebellious. I said, Lord, my hand, my right hand. And then I looked up and saw my driver, who had also been thrown out of the vehicle. We were sitting closer than you and I are together. Bilateral femoral fractures of both femurs, tib fib fractures, both legs, fractured base of skull. And I just had a moment to ask the good Lord to forgive me for my ingratitude, and got to work on him. So got to work on him and got him back to the base camp. And sadly, after numerous surgeries he and I both had, he died 11 days later. Anyway, that was the background of what ultimately was the reason that it was for what the military determined was exceptional service under those circumstances. Wow. And it came as quite a surprise, but it was a blessed surprise.
It seems that God has definitely preserved your life through this and watched over you. And, you know, it's interesting. Some may look at the Sabbath as, again, as we talked about earlier, as a disadvantage. Mm-hmm. But through it all, and you can testify to this, that it has been a blessing to you. It has sustained you and kept you in many ways. I know we have much more to talk about. Dr. Landless reminds us that the Sabbath isn't just a day off. It's a statement of faith. It's a message to others and to yourself. God comes first, and I can trust him to take care of me. If you'd like to learn more about the Sabbath, please visit our website at hopetv.org/hopeatnight to sign up for our free study resources. While there, you can also view previous episodes and download this season's free gift. When we come back, we'll open up the floor for questions for Dr. Dorvé and Dr. Landless. Stay with us. Welcome back to Hope at Night. We've heard two powerful testimonies, a musician and a medical doctor, both of whom stood firm for the Sabbath. Now it's time to hear from our studio audience who has a question for our guest. Right over there.
Dr. Dorvé, was there ever a time where you were angry at your grandmother for not telling your mom about your arm? And if so, were you ever able to forgive her?
No, actually, I never really have any issue with my grandmother, although she thought that I have a problem with her. But when I went back to visit her, you know, she spent a lot of time crying. But when I went back seeing her, and I showed her that how much I love her, and so it was never an issue with me, although she thought that I did.
Dr. Dorvé, do you believe your life would have been different? How do you think your life might have been if that didn't happen?
Well, actually, that's a good question, and I think about this a lot. Sometimes, you know, when tragedy happened, people always blame God, but instead of thinking why. Now I'm going to explain why, but I am the only one in my family who is here who had a degree in college. We not only got a PhD, but I even have an MBA with 3 concentration. No one else in my family have that. Not saying that having a degree is the reason, but I think sometimes God used things that happen to you. Maybe that's the best way for God to save me. Maybe that's the best way for God to work with me. I always believe that my disability is an opportunity for God to work with me.
And it certainly hasn't limited you by any
Absolutely
means. Right. Any other questions? Right over there.
My question is for Dr. Landless. I didn't know you could say no in the military. Did you ever have a negative experience or disciplinary action because of your sharing your beliefs?
You know, there were always consequences, and there was the threat of consequences, which what I found, and I really want this to come across from my heart, that God is faithful. And that's one of the things that I learned through those situations. That, you know, in the Bible, it talks about Paul breathing fiery threats against the Christians. I experienced that in the army. I experienced that. But interestingly, how God turned it around. They threatened when they even gave them medals. That they said, we're going to give this to you on a Saturday morning. I said, I can't come. They said, we have a special function for your family in a special place, and they really wanted to put on a big deal. And I said, I can't come. They said, in which case we'll mail it to you. I said, send it in the mail. And got a phone call just a few days later saying, we have a special medal parade on Friday morning. Please present yourself. So there were consequences, but in all of it, and some of them were uncomfortable situations, God is faithful. So I don't have any regrets.
That's wonderful and a powerful witness for what you believe in and the God you serve.
Amen.
Any other questions?
So there is a lot of debate about Saturdays and Sundays. So the Sabbath is on a Saturday. So does that mean that Saturday is the seventh day of the week?
It's a very simple thing. It absolutely is the seventh day of the week. Sunday is the first day. Saturday is the seventh day. You look through all the languages of the world. Sabbath, Shabbat, Savator, Sabado. Its seventh day is Sabbath, is Saturday. So there's not really any question as to whether it's on the seventh day being Saturday.
Any other questions? Yes.
Could I just have some extra clarity? If the Sabbath is on Saturday, does that mean that Jesus rose on Saturday, or did he rise after the Sabbath on Sunday?
We see in the Gospels very clearly stated, and on the first day of the week. That was the day Jesus rose. So he rose on Sunday. And that's what he predicted. He would be in the grave for 3 days. And he rose on Sunday.
So, Dr. Landless, then what was Jesus doing on the Sabbath?
Well, he was resting on the Sabbath. And interestingly, it brings a whole other conversation, but just to think that they were in a big hurry to get Jesus off the cross and buried because the sun was going to set. Now, you think of that and correlate that to what Jesus himself said. The Sabbath was made for man. Here people are doing things. They kill an innocent man, but want to be ready for the Sabbath. And that's why I used the term earlier in what I said, to rest from our work, our physical labor, and our works. Because we cannot do things to be acceptable to God. We are in relationship with him. That's what makes us acceptable. But observing the Sabbath is done out of love for him. Amen. Not out of fear, not because of consequences, but because we love him.
Right, and it's really beautiful that even in death, Jesus kept the Sabbath. And it was only until the Sabbath was over that those works rising up from the grave took place.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. Any other questions? Yeah. Right over there.
Dr. Landless, could you give us a story about working with the great Nelson Mandela?
That was one of the hugest privileges of my life, to be part of the team that cared for such a great man. And I was one of the consultants in our cardiology department, and our professor was an internationally renowned individual. I had the privilege of working with him and with President Mandela, and got to meet him on a number of occasions, work with him, and to hear him speak, and to have him as a guest in our department. I had the privilege to invite him and some other very prominent cardiologists from around the world. And what I learned as we worked together, what a humble man, what an individual who saw the best in people, who shared the story of how one of his jailers on Robben Island, who gave him a really rough time, gave Nelson Mandela a hard time. And that same individual rose through the ranks, became the commanding officer of Robben Island, and ultimately moved up to where he was going to become an ambassador in another country. And that was just before Nelson Mandela was to be released from prison. And during that time, there were a lot of conversations going on, because it was well known that this event was going to take place, Nelson Mandela was going to be released, and there was no question that he would be the next president of South Africa. And so the overseas countries were communicating, and they contacted Nelson Mandela when he was in Robben Island and said, "This name has come up, what do you think?" Now, what do I think? I think that if it would be me, I might have said, this individual, no ways. He actually said, I think it would be a good one to do. Take him, do it. And then he said this. He said, one of the things you need to remember, there's an important Xhosa saying, which is his home language, that the wheel of life turns. Sometimes you're at the top, other times you're at the bottom. And he said, one always needs to remember your responsibility in working with people and give them the best chance, which is what he did, which is why there was not a huge blood-shedding situation in South Africa in 1994, because of the committed leadership of someone who wanted to bring peaceful change. Forgiving, caring, and consistent. An amazing, amazing man.
Wonderful, and how different from our world today.
Absolutely.
We got time for one last question. Right over there.
Was there ever a moment for either of you where you chose to forgo the Sabbath or part of the Sabbath just for an opportunity that you couldn't pass up?
I think all of the times, it's beautiful to talk about the blessing of the Sabbath. But sometimes we face some challenges that are very hard. I mean, you don't even know how to do it. I remember when I was doing my undergrad, so many faculty come and talk to me because I was not willing to break the Sabbath to play for the orchestra. The context was, I am a freshman, second semester. I auditioned with the orchestra, and I made it to the orchestra because, we have 8 doctoral trumpet student, masters, and other student, master's student, and undergrads. So with the blind audition, when you make it that high, it's very hard for you to let go. And when I go to the first rehearsal, they only select 3, and I was among the group they select to be playing for the orchestra, and I realized how hard it is for me to just let go. When I look at the performances, they were on Sabbath. So I went to the professor and I said, well, I can't do that because I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. And of course I asked to explain why. But I remember before I had to tell him that I could not, it was very painful. In fact, I cried after that. I said, Lord, why? Because I thought when you open doors for me, I need to come in. Why now? The same time, I have to turn down also a gig in Carnegie Hall. And I said, well, why am I even doing music if there's a lot of things that I could not do? But I understood one thing. I said, well, God must have a plan for me. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, if God can give his life for me, if God can give everything for me, he must have a plan for me to let this thing go. So I let that go. And to tell the truth, God opened many other doors for me. I mean, during my undergrad, I was probably the student who traveled more than all the other students to play gig and then go to Europe, go to other places and play. I mean, sometimes even the professor asks himself, how do you get all those performances? But God bless. And from that opportunity too, a lot of that opened door for me to be able to share my faith. In fact, around that same time, I was able to share my faith with some students. And one of them today is a pastor in the Adventist church. And another one is married to another pastor in Michigan. So what I understood, those things were very painful. And then one of the other one was when I was doing my PhD. Right. It was very painful for me to do. But I chose God because I remember what God have done for me in the past and how I could trust him.
Dr. Landless, you got the last thought.
We've never met before. Our experiences are so parallel. They could superimpose. The short answer to what you asked, your question, I can honestly say, I can't ever say that I've never broken the Sabbath, but I have never accepted or done consciously gone and done training or anything related to personal betterment on a Sabbath. It's led to similar circumstances of rebuke, people saying, you're crazy, you can do this, why don't you do it, you're depriving us, etc. But what I will add to that is that as a result, yes, at times one feels, well, why am I doing this? But God has been faithful. And the rewards have been more than I could have ever imagined. When I say the rewards, the outcomes. And the opportunities even better. I've had the privilege of speaking in the House of Commons, meeting with kings, meeting with presidents, treating presidents, of being in the halls of academia and also at the coalface of the greatest need of the smallest dispensaries on earth. God has been faithful. Things I would never have imagined. And it's been worth it.
Thank you, both of you, for sharing with us. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
We've heard today how the Sabbath isn't just a commandment, it's an invitation. An invitation to pause, to breathe, and to reconnect with the one who created you. By faithfully keeping the Sabbath, our guests today deepen their spiritual life. Their experience reminds us that when we set aside time for God, he meets us there, offering rest, restoration, and a reminder of his provision for your life. If you haven't yet experienced the blessings of a Sabbath rest, I invite you on the next 7th day of the week to press pause on your everyday busy work and to take time for the things that give you true meaning and hope. God, family, time in God's nature, and service to others. May you find rest, joy, and a deeper connection with God as you experience firsthand this weekly gift. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Hope at Night.